Okay, hello everyone. I see people are coming in, but I'm gonna go ahead and give everyone 1 to 2 minutes, maybe three at the most, for people to be able to show up and have some time to get in here. So I'll go ahead and start at 2:02 or 2:03. Okay, I don't see anyone else joining in, so I'm gonna go ahead and get started. The first couple slides are kind of introduction and overview slides anyway, so if anyone does kind of show up a little bit late, you're not gonna miss too much content or anything like that. I'm gonna go ahead and get started then. Okay, hopefully everyone can see my screen. Perfect. Okay. I do want to apologize in advance. I've been feeling a little bit under the weather the last couple days. I'm feeling a lot better today, but I do have like a residual cough and residual sniffles. So if that does come up in the middle of the meeting, then I apologize. I'm going to do my best to turn my mic off whenever I do need to cough, so that you guys don't have to hear it. But like I said, it might happen. I'm not always quick enough for that. Okay. So hello, everyone. Well, let me just see. Yeah, okay. I don't see any more people coming in. So like I said, I'm just going to go ahead and get started. But hello, everyone. My name is Kai. Welcome to the Statistics Solutions webinar on confidently presenting your quantitative results. So this webinar will be recorded, so you'll have access to the recording in about 24 to 48 hours, I believe. You should get an email with that recording access. I'm going to answer any questions that anyone has towards the end. I have a whole section for questions. So if you do have any questions in the middle of this PowerPoint, please go ahead and either put it in the chat or put it in the Q&A box throughout the PowerPoint, and I'll kind of get to all of those questions at the end. Okay. Oh, maybe if my PowerPoint slide will go to the next slide. There we go. Okay. And then one more thing before we got started, I just wanted to talk really briefly about our company, Statistics Solutions. So Statistics Solutions is a full service dissertation consulting company. We provide graduate students with timely editorial support on your dissertations and scholarly projects. So basically what that means is we help everyone from chapter 1 through chapter 5. We also help with survey upload and preparing for your defense. Sorry about that. Survey upload, preparing for your defense, and kind of almost everything in between. So whether or not you need help with APA editing, feedback, addressing committee feedback, working on the results, working on the discussion, kind of anything 1 through 4, we help with that. So if you are interested in our services, we do have 30-minute free consultation calls Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. If you are interested, I have an email and phone number up on the screen. This information will also be at the very end of these slides as well. So if you don't get it down now, you will have access to write it down in a little bit. So, as a quick overview of what we will be talking about today. First, we are going to discuss the purpose of your results chapter. So why does it matter? Then we're going to discuss the specific components that are necessary to include in the results. And then finally, when we have some time at the end, we're going to answer some questions. First things first, the purpose of the results chapter is to analyze and present the data to answer your research questions and hypotheses. Therefore, the most important aspect of the results section is reporting the analyses and results for each research question, as well as stating whether you answered the questions or confirmed your hypotheses. However, anything beyond reporting the results and research questions should be left to the discussion and chapter 5. This means, for example, that in your results chapter, you should state that the results of a paired samples t-test were significant, and that significance indicated that there were significant differences in satisfaction between the pre-test and the post-test groups following an intervention. You would then even state the direction of that effect. So you would say that satisfaction scores were greater for the post group when then compared to the pre-group. And then finally, you would state whether or not that supports your hypotheses, right? So this means that we can accept the null hypothesis, or well, we can't accept it. You can never accept the null hypothesis. So you fail to reject the null hypothesis, or you reject the null hypothesis. However, any implications of what this means for your study, such as whether or not your intervention was successful, should be stated in chapter 5. And we'll get a little bit more into this kind of further down the line. And then finally, it is important to follow your specific guidelines for your school. So while most results sections are very similar and formulaic in nature, so most of the time they're almost exactly the same. The only thing that's going to be different is the actual results. That being said, different schools require different things to be included. So make sure you're aware of these sections or any differences that your specific guidelines might require that I don't talk about today. That is to say, just, make sure you read your rubric and that you're on the same page of what your school wants for you. Now that we have discussed why we write a results section, we will now discuss the specific components that should be included in every results section, starting predictably at the introduction. So your intro paragraph should be no longer than 1 to 1.5 pages in length. In this section, you will restate the purpose of your study for your restate the purpose of your study and your research hypotheses. So I always begin my introduction with something along the lines of the purpose of this study was to blah, 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 blah. Or, the purpose of this study was to determine if the intervention had any effect on participant satisfaction scores, something like that, right? And then afterwards, you would restate your research questions and your research hypotheses. You want to remind the reader why these analyses are important or being run. Then you briefly outline what was presented in the chapter. This means that you're going to state the summary statistics or descriptive statistics that you used. So did you use means or standard deviations or frequencies and percentages, or did you use both? And then also you're going to briefly state the analyses that you use to answer each of your research questions. So if you're thinking about this in terms of, how are you going to write it? Your first couple sentences are going to be about, restating what you have already talked about in your previous chapters. So what is the purpose of your study? What are your research questions? Next, you're going to talk a little bit about why, we're running this again. Again, that's kind of in line with restating what has gone on in the chapters before. And then you're going to go into the outline of the contents of your results chapter. So describe what you did first. So we ran descriptive statistics first. We ran means and standard deviations for these variables. We ran frequencies and percentages for these variables. And then after that, you're going to say, to answer the 3 research questions, we used 2 pair samples t-tests and an ANOVA. The results are presented below. Very short, very sweet. And not too much work involved with the introduction. It's just kind of an overview and kind of a lead in to the next couple paragraphs and parts of your results that are actually really important. Not that the introduction isn't important, because it is, but it's definitely a transition paragraph or transition statements that you're going to use in the introduction for sure. So for this next slide, sometimes this information is added into the introduction section, and sometimes this information is added into its own section called data collection and preparation. So before you start writing your results section, make sure to check your school's outline and requirements to see where you should include this information. Normally, I just include this information in its own section because it makes the introduction a little bit more clean and helpful to give the writer, the reader insight as to, what the outline of this chapter is going to be without kind of bogging down with the details of how you collected your data and prepared your data for analysis. That being said, some schools really care about you having that information in the introduction. So like I said, just make sure to check your outline and requirements. So once you have included the data analyses that you plan to run, so that's in your introduction, you will then discuss the data collection and preparation techniques that you used to prepare the data. First, you should discuss, again, how the data was collected. Specifically, if there was any differences between your Chapter 3 data collection plan and what actually happened. This means that if you made any changes between your Chapter 3 and your Chapter 4, that you should include it here. Additionally, you will speak about the responses that you received from participants. So what is your total sample size? Did it match up with the sample size determined from the power analysis that you ran in Chapter 3? What was the attrition rate? Did you have a large number of people who took the pre-test but didn't take the post-test? And why might that have happened? Did you exclude any participants due to any exclusion criteria, or did you include any participants due to any inclusion criteria? So what people did you keep in and what people did you exclude from the data analysis and why? And then finally, in this section, you're going to briefly describe anything that you did to prepare the data for analysis. So this includes looking for outliers, looking for missing data, creating composite scores for variables of interest, or running a reliability analysis if necessary. The reliability analysis part, sometimes people have that also under the summary statistics or descriptive statistics section. And that is usually where I put it. But again, it is up to your school's guidelines. And sometimes they have you put that in your data collection and preparation section as well. So for example, say that you had, 3 composite scores and you checked for outliers and there were no outliers, and you had a pretty high attrition rate between, pre and post. In your data collection and preparation section, your first couple sentences are going to briefly describe again how you collected the data. So let's say you used an online survey for the pre-test, an online survey for the post-test, and then there was some sort of online intervention in between them, right? Then your next couple sentences are going to be, the actual responses and response rate and attrition, stuff like that. So what was your total sample size? Say we had like 75 people. We had a lot of people. So 75 people total finished the study. Then you would talk about maybe, well, we had 100 people originally, but about 20 to 30 of them, didn't actually finish. So therefore we have an attrition rate of blank percent. I'm not going to do the math on that. And then afterwards, you would then say this, our total sample size was 75 participants. This meets the requirement for the power analysis that we ran, which said that we needed a total of 79, right? And then finally, you're going to say, to prepare the data for analysis, we made sure that we checked for outliers using box plots and checked for any missing data. There were no outliers or missing data present in the data set. And then finally, we computed composite scores according to instrument instruction. Something like that. Very, brief. I kind of went through that really quickly, but on the next couple slides, we actually have some examples. So in this first example, you see that they're talking about, an initial total of 485 surveys were received. However, large portions of the survey were not completed and was therefore removed, leaving a total final of 396 participants for the analysis. All remaining missing responses, were inputted using blah, 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 blah. So this is talking about, their attrition rate, what their final sample looked like. and what they did to deal with any missing data. And again, I'm going to go through these examples really quickly, but since they're on the screen and you will have access to the recording later, you'll be able to access these examples relatively easily. This next section, data collection section, oops, did not mean to do that. It's talking about when the data collection happened, how many people accessed the survey. So 163 people accessed the survey. 59 participants left 10% or more of the survey questions unanswered, so therefore they were taken out. They had some exclusion criteria, so anyone who did not agree to the consent form or those with zero work experience were taken out of the data set. And then no missing responses were replaced, and then your final total was 98. So this is all kind of examples of what I was talking about in terms of making sure that you're talking about the response rates and the attrition rates. And then this last example here is talking about a power analysis. So let's say you ran a study, you had 75 people show up, but your power analysis had originally said that you needed 103 people show up. So instead, now we have to run something known as a post hoc power analysis. This power analysis is something that we've done after the fact, after you've already collected all of your data. It's to make sure that you're actually meeting the required power that you needed to meet. And so it's saying here that like our power for the independent samples t-test is 0.76, and then the power for the multiple linear regression was 0.94. So power on average 0.8 or above indicates like the standard level of power that most researchers look for. So something like 0.76 would indicate that you're underpowered, and something like 0.94 would mean that you have the correct power for detecting an effect if there is one. Again, these are just examples of kind of how you would word some of these things in the data collection and preparation sections. So the next section of your results chapter will be the summary and descriptive statistics section. So in this section, you will present the summary statistics, such as means and standard deviations for continuous variables, and frequencies and percentages for categorical variables for both your demographic data and as well as the variables of interest, aka your independent and your dependent variables. So this is done to get a good sense and understanding of what your sample looks like. So how educated is your sample, and what is the breakdown of their gender? Do you have more women responding to your survey than men responding to your survey? And if this is the case, do those breakdowns align with the total population that you were sampling from? Discuss that here if applicable. Additionally, by looking at summary statistics of variables of interest, you can get a sense for where your participants are falling on your measured variables. For example, back to the example I was kind of talking about earlier, if you're looking at satisfaction scores in participants and see on average that your participants are scoring at a mean of 35, that information might not make sense until we compare it to the range of the scale. So say the scale ranges from 1 to 40, where higher numbers indicate more satisfaction. Well, then a score of 35, if our highest score available is 40, indicates that our participants are fairly satisfied on average. And then finally, if you ran any reliability analyses, sometimes school requirements will have that you report that stuff here. So Chromebox alphas, stuff like that. Okay, next 3 slides or 3 or 4 slides are just examples of what might look like a demographic or descriptive statistics section, for an example study. So in this example here, this is kind of a write-up for someone who is looking at categorical variables. So if you're running categorical variables, that means that we're going to run frequencies and percentages. So in this case here, gender is, we have got male and female as our categories. So therefore 255 of the total sample is saying that they are identifying as male, and 135 are identifying as female, and then about 6 people declined to answer that question. That's what that missing stands for. That percentage that's next to it is the percentage of the total population. So 255 out of however many total. I could do math if I wanted to, but I don't. To add that. So divide that by the total, and you get 64.4% of the total population is saying that they are male. Same thing goes with age, so we have the majority of people are saying that they're between 30 and 44 because about 239 people said that they were between those age ranges. So this is just an example of how you would present some of your frequencies and percentages. The next example is presenting means and standard deviations, min and max. So this is our continuous variables. So something like age. We look at the mean here, and then on average, the age is about 48.2 years old. Time working as a mental health nurse in years seems like on average people are working about 17 years. Stuff like that. And then finally, this last example is a reliability analysis and how you would report something like that. So reliability analyses are run on composite scores to make sure that all of the questions that had to go into that composite score are actually reliably asking the same kinds of questions. They're all reliably asking kind of within the same groups. And so anything above a 0.7 is going to indicate that it's an acceptable level of internal consistency reliability. And so then you would just kind of state that, and you would then say something along the lines of like all the composite scores, were above 0.7. So that's indicating that all of our composite scores here are reliable, falling under an acceptable level of reliability. And again, I'm not going to go too much into these examples right now, but you will have access to these later, and they can be very helpful in terms of writing up stuff. Just as kind of a side note, I also really suggest that if you're kind of stumped on how to write up a results section, and maybe your school does not provide you with some sort of rubric or outline or something to follow, then reading other people's results sections that have been published can actually be really helpful. A lot of the times they still follow the same layout that like a dissertation or a thesis results section will follow. And so that can give you a good, mindset of how you want to be reporting your results, especially if those results are, similar to the study that you're looking at. Obviously, we don't want to plagiarize, but looking at the structure of how people write things up can be really helpful. Okay. So once you have done a breakdown of what your data looks like, it's time to start moving into the hypothesis testing. However, before you report the results of the tests themselves, you actually have to report the assumption tests that you ran for each analysis and whether those assumptions were met by the data. So assumptions are important because they let you know whether or not you have the correct type of data for the analysis that you wish to run. So in this section, you will list the assumptions that were conducted for each test. You should then describe how each assumption test was tested, the results of each assumption test, and whether the assumption was met or not. And then also, you're going to also describe, the next step you took if the assumptions were violated, such as using something such as a non-parametric test instead. So for example, back to the example that I've kind of been using throughout, let's say we're looking at employee satisfaction scores between a pre-test and a post-test with some sort of intervention in the middle. Okay, so for example, we're running a t-test, a paired samples t-test in this case. You would state that you ran the assumptions of normality, homogeneity of variance, and a lack of outliers. You would then state that you used a Shapiro-Wilks test for normality, a Levine's test for homogeneity, and a box plot for the outliers. Then state whether or not those assumptions were met. For example, if your normality test was violated, you then may state that you ran a Wilcoxon signed rank test afterwards. This is a non-parametric version to a paired samples t-test. And by non-parametric, I mean that it does not share the same assumptions that a t-test would share, would need to be done. And then finally, sometimes this section is presented separately from your results of the analysis, and then sometimes they're reported within the results of any analysis. So again, make sure to check your school's guidelines for which way that they prefer. And then next couple slides, I have some examples of assumption testing. So another way to run normality is actually to run a PP plot. This is an example of a PP plot for normality. So you would say something along the lines of, we tested for the assumption of normality. Normality was examined using a PP plot. The data showed no significant deviation from the normality line, indicating that the assumption of normality was met. So in this case, as long as your points are kind of following along that straight line, with no significant kind of deviations, then you've met the, excuse me, sorry, I'm trying not to cough. Sorry about that. So like I was saying, if your dots are kind of following along this regression line here, this dark line, without any significant deviations, that's assuming that your assumption of normality has been met. Next, this is an example of multicollinearity. So multicollinearity is the assumption in which we assume that our variables in the model are not too highly correlated with one another. So meaning that you don't want them to be too related and so related to one another that you can't tell the two variables apart from each other because they're basically the same. So we don't want that. We don't need them to be 100% different, but we just don't want them to be so close to each other that the test can't tell it apart. Multicollinearity is usually used for a multiple linear regression, or sometimes a repeated measures ANOVA or a mixed model ANOVA if you have enough variables in the model. And then for multicollinearity, anything over a value of 10 is going to indicate that you have severe multicollinearity in the data. And then also this example talks about outliers as well. So they're saying here that there was one outlier, and then this outlier was then excluded from the analysis. So now that we have discussed how we prepare the data, the descriptive statistics, and any assumption testing, we can finally talk about the meat and potatoes of your results chapter, the actual results, and specifically the results of your analysis broken up by research question. And so what I mean by that is for each research question, you will first clearly identify the analysis that you ran and the variables that were entered into the analysis. And again, we're going to organize this by research question. So what I mean by that is, like, research question 1, 2, and 3. For research question 1, you're going to have a whole thing with results. Research question 2, you're going to have a whole thing with results. And then research question 3, you're going to have a whole section with the results as well. You don't want to put them all together unless that those analyses are answering multiple questions at a time. Where was I? Yeah, so for each research question, you're going to clearly identify what analysis you ran and the variables that were entered into the analysis. So if we're running a paired samples t-test, like, for satisfaction between pre and post, you would state that to address research question 1, a paired samples t-test was conducted to determine if there were significant differences in satisfaction scores between the pre-test and a post-test following the intervention. Then you would report the results themselves, aka whether or not the results were significant, and the appropriate statistics associated with each test. So for your t-test, you would report the t-statistic, the degrees of freedom, the p-value, and the Cohen's effect, D effect size. Finally, you're then going to discuss any post-hoc tests if necessary. Post-hoc tests are usually run with something like an ANOVA. Also, sometimes a regression will run post-hoc tests. Additionally, in this section, it is important to state clearly whether your null hypothesis was supported or rejected based on the results of the analysis. So for the purposes of my example that I've been using, say your results are significant, you would state, the results of this analysis were significant, indicating that there was a significant difference between pre-test and post-test. Specifically, the post-test scores were larger than the pre-test. And then obviously within this section, you're going to be, describing the actual numbers. I'm just leaving that out for posterity's sake. And then you would say something along the lines of, because the results are significant, this indicates that the null hypothesis can be rejected in favor of the alternative hypothesis that there was a significant difference in the satisfaction between pre and post scores. And then the last, I think like 4 or 5 slides are examples for this. So this is an example, and I'm not going to go through these. Like I'm going to have them up on the screen for a couple seconds, just so that you're able to, when you're looking back at this recording, kind of look at them, because there's one for like a bunch of different analysis. I think there's one for a t-test, one for regression, one for an ANOVA. So I'm not going to go through those, but what I am going to go through is just the first one with y'all. So this is an example of an independent samples t-test. So their differences. So they're looking at differences in this SAI score based on, male versus female participants here. So in this analysis, the variable was gender, and the dependent variable was this SAI total score. So again, we're stating what was conducted and why we conducted it. So we conducted an independent samples t-test, and we did it to see if there were any differences in these scores based on gender. Then we're talking about what the variables were entered into. So our independent variable was gender, dependent variable was SAI score. Then we're going to talk about whether or not it's significant. The results of the t-test were not significant. And then here are these statistics that I was telling you about that you need to add, the appropriate statistics for each test. So here's our t-value. Our degrees of freedom is this 105 in parentheses. T-value is that 1.96. Our p-value lets us know whether or not it's significant. 0.52 or 0.052. It's not below 0.050, so therefore it's not significant. Although I would call this marginally significant, but that's a whole different topic for a whole different day. And then our Cohen's D. And then so then after we state those statistics, what does this test significance indicate or not indicate? So that indicates that there are no differences in these scores based on our male or between like our male and our female students. And then finally, we're writing a clear statement about whether or not the hypothesis was rejected or not rejected. And so we failed to reject the null hypothesis, or the null hypothesis was not rejected. The way that we're writing this is because that you can never accept the null hypothesis. You can only fail to reject it. It's just weird statistics wording. I couldn't tell you why. But basically that's just how we write it. Again, if this was significant, you would be writing it the other way, so that the alternative hypothesis was accepted, and the null hypothesis was rejected. That would be if it was significant. This is just another example of an independent samples t-test. So this is based on school level. This is an example of an ANOVA. So we're looking at differences in perceptions of teachers towards professional learning effectiveness based on teaching years of experience. We're using an ANOVA in this case because there's more than 2 categories of years of experience. So years of experience seems to have like 4 or 5 categories. Looks like 5, 6, 5. And so a t-test isn't going to work because t-tests only look at 2 groups, and then an ANOVA is 3 or more groups. So that's why an ANOVA is being run here. But again, it's kind of the same breakdown. So we're talking about what test was run and why. Then we're talking about the independent variables and dependent variables in the analysis, whether or not it was significant, including the statistics, and then whether or not the null hypothesis was rejected or not. And then this is just an example of kind of breaking it up by research question, which is what I prefer to do. So, for research question 1 asked, what are the relationships, blah, 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 blah. So what did we do? We ran a Pearson correlation, so on and so forth. Okay, and then this slide is an example of a regression analysis. So, the results of the regression were significant. Here's our statistics that go along with them. And then what does that mean? So 90% of the variance was explained. And then another clear statement that indicates whether or not the null hypothesis was rejected or not. So in this case, it was significant, so our null hypothesis was rejected. Oh, sorry, one more thing. And then afterwards, this sex was a significant positive predictor indicating that females had a higher prevention of behavior scores than males. This is an example of a post hoc test for a regression. So it comes after whether or not you state whether or not the null hypothesis was rejected. Okay. And then finally, the last section of your results is going to be the summary of your entire chapter. So this summary, similarly to the introduction, is going to be 1 to 1.5, maybe 2 pages in length, depending on how many analyses you ran. And it's basically going to serve a similar function to the introduction does. So the introduction works as a lead in to the rest of your chapter, whereas your summary is going to work as a lead in to your chapter, the next chapter that you have, which is your discussion or your conclusion chapters. So you're going to summarize the chapter contents and findings of each research question. So again, we're going to separate it out by research question. We're going to restate the answer to each research question and hypothesis. So what I mean by that is we're going to restate whether or not the null hypothesis was rejected or not for each research question. And then finally, we're going to provide some sort of transition statement into the discussion chapter. So a lot of the times my summary paragraphs look something like, overall, I like to restate the purpose just because it kind of bookends, but it's not required that you restate the purpose in the summary. So I'll say something along the lines of, overall, the purpose of the study was to determine if, there were significant differences between pre-test and post-test for satisfaction scores in healthcare professionals or something like that. Then, I would say something along the lines of, to answer each research question, paired samples t-test was conducted to determine if there were differences. The results of the paired samples t-test were significant, indicating that the null hypothesis was not rejected. And then you would do that for each research question. So maybe you had another research question where you ran another paired samples t-test. And so you would say, for research question 2, another paired samples t-test was conducted, blah, 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 blah. And then finally, the last sentence should be something along the lines of the implications of these results will be further examined in chapter 5. And that's kind of all you have to do for the summary. It doesn't need to be too long. And another thing that I will stress for the summary paragraph, this is one paragraph within your results chapter where you do not want to use any numbers. I wouldn't do it unless you're talking about your total sample size. That's kind of the only number that I recommend using in your summary paragraph. Everything else you should describe using words in your summary. I hope that makes sense, and please let me know if it does not. Okay. So now we're kind of at the point where we're going to be looking at questions. I'm going to go look in the chat, see if anyone had anything to say. Excuse me. If anything does come up, or, if anyone was waiting to ask questions, now's the time to do it. I'm just going to keep this information up on the screen while I am answering questions, so that if you are interested in our services at Statistics Solutions, you do have the ability to write this information down. Okay, so question in the chat is, how do we choose sample size on a basis of questionnaire items? So I'm not 100% what that question means, but I think I get what you're asking. So in terms of choosing sample size, it's actually based on the analysis that you're running. So say we're running a regression, then a regression has a certain sample size that we need. And then, versus a t-test, which requires a lot smaller of a sample than a regression would require. Regressions usually require a lot more people to be able to look for an effect. So it's actually not based on how many questions you ask. Instead, it's based on what analysis that you're running. If you're asking, then if you're determining, how long your questionnaire should be, that is a judgment call. And it kind of sucks. But basically, if your questionnaire is super long, then, a lot of people don't finish the questionnaire. So you have to be careful about how long your questionnaires are. I hope that answers your question. If it doesn't, please let me know. I will, I'll try to update that. Okay. Are these slides we've seen a part of the services that y'all offer today? Yeah. So if first off, these slides will become available to you after this meeting is over. You should get an email with the link to the recording of this webinar and these slides. So you will have access to those. In terms of what we do as services that we offer, absolutely. We work on chapter 4 all the time. That's probably the thing that I do the most, at least. Chapter 3 and chapter 4 are kind of my bread and butter. And so, we work with analyzing the data with you, making sure that you understand what the data analysis means, what that means for your study, that kind of thing. And then we help you write it up as well. So we'll help you with the introduction, the descriptive statistics, the hypothesis testing, and the summary. So that absolutely is part of our services. Okay, next question. For independent samples t-test, we will apply only the dependent variable or also to apply the dependent variable. I'm not exactly sure what that question is asking. If you mean that like when you're writing up a t-test, you only include the dependent variable, that's not the case. You'll probably also include the independent variable. So your dependent variable is in a t-test is what the differences we're looking for. And then your independent variable is going to be the groups that you're looking at the differences between. So say our independent variable is gender, then we're looking at differences in satisfaction based on, whether or not they're identifying as male or female. Based on the quote provided, will you help with all of the areas discussed once the invoice is paid? Yeah, so these are great questions in terms of kind of the support that we do. Absolutely. So it is based on the quote that you're provided. We have a couple different options for helping with the results. We have full results, where, we basically help with every single aspect of the results, kind of almost everything that's in this PowerPoint. We also just have hourly work as well. And so that means you'll pay for a certain amount of hours. So say you think, oh, well, I only need about like 3 hours of help and I only need help on this one section of my results section. And you don't want to pay for like the full results help, then absolutely. Usually it's about a 2-week turnaround after you pay and agree, but it does depend on the type of analysis that you're running and your data and all that fun stuff. Next, are there any webinars that assist with running statistical analysis using SPSS, or is that only for individual consultations? Yeah, so I mean, we don't want to give too much free content away, right? But yeah, we have webinars that talk about specific statistical tests. I don't know if we're running any this year. Just because we have a set webinar schedule for like a amount of months, and then the webinars get changed kind of from month to month, or every 6 months. I think we kind of change out the webinars, and so I think we do have some of them on choosing the correct analysis and stuff like that, but we don't have any webinars specifically on SPSS. So if you are interested in stuff like that, we do those consultations, but those usually are individual consultations, mostly because if one person's running a t-test in SPSS and then someone else is running a regression, we're not going to be able to have time in 1 hour to be able to look at kind of all of those, and then having one separate for each one is kind of a lot. But if that's something that you're interested in, I do think we have like a suggestion box for webinars. I think it's on our website somewhere. So if you want to write that down, maybe my boss will say yes to that. But as of right now, if you are interested in kind of running it in SPSS, we do have individual consultations for stuff like that. Is it possible for a quantitative study to not have a hypothesis? If yes, in what cases can this be? No, not really. So for quantitative studies, the hypotheses and research questions are based off of the type of test that you're indicating that you want to run. And so therefore, in every quantitative study, you have a null hypothesis. You have 2 hypotheses for every single research question. So research question 1, you're going to have 2 hypotheses. Research question 2, you're going to have 2 hypotheses. And those 2 hypotheses are called the null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis. The null hypothesis means that there's no results, right? So your null hypothesis is always, always, always going to be there was no effect, there is no relationship, there is no difference, none, null, right? Whereas your alternative hypothesis is always going to be there was a significant difference, or there is a significant effect, or there is a significant relationship. The hypotheses don't have to be specific to the research question, or specific in the sense that you don't have to say, like, I think that the pre-test is going to be larger than the post-test. The hypotheses don't have to be like that for quantitative research. Instead, they have to be written in a null and alternative hypothesis form. I hope that makes sense. I'm ready to pay soon. Or can I request you to assist me for my full results section? This was great. Absolutely. My name's Kai. C-A-I. My last name is Signori, S-I-G-N-O-R-I. I would absolutely love to help someone with your full results section. So please go ahead and, email or call or whatever works best for you in terms of kind of reaching out to us. You'll get in touch with Janine or Brittany, our two sales managers, and then absolutely, if you have someone that you want to work with and you want to work with me, that would be awesome. And if I have time, I'll absolutely say yes to working with anyone. So I'm super glad this helped you out. I'd be super happy to help kind of moving forward for sure. Please share your email address. Yeah, my work email address is kai@statisticsolutions.com. So it's literally just my first name and then @statisticsolutions.com. That being said, though, if you do have specific questions, I'm not super well, I am receptive to my email, but if you're not like signed on with me as a client, I don't necessarily prioritize those emails because I get a lot a day. So if you are interested in kind of asking a specific question, the info at Statistics Solutions email is also very helpful. It's connected to my sales manager, Janine. And oops, did not mean to do that, y'all. And she's very good at asking or answering questions like that for sure. But if you do want my email, it is just CAI@statisticsolutions.com. Okay. I'm not seeing any more questions come in, but I'm gonna give it a couple more, like a minute or two, just if in case anyone has any extra questions. I do want to say that I really do appreciate everyone asking these questions. I think you guys are asking really thoughtful and insightful questions, and I do really appreciate that. So if you do come to any other webinars, please keep it coming. I do a bunch of these, and so do my colleagues Johanna and Justin, I think. He does a bunch as well, and he's really good. Also my coworker Tom, but he does a lot of the qualitative stuff. So if you're interested in quantitative stuff, it's mostly going to be me and my coworker Justin. But yeah, we have all these webinars kind of going all month. And we have them on a bunch of different topics. I think I'm doing one 2 weeks from now on APA editing. And then I also have one on, choosing the correct methodology for you that I think I have in a couple weeks as well. So yeah, if anyone is interested in stuff like that, then please feel free. Please provide us a participation certificate. We do not actually provide participation certificates for these webinars. So I do apologize for that. But that is not something that we do for the webinars. Okay. Not seeing anything else. So like I said, I really appreciate all y'all for stopping by and asking really awesome questions. I'm gonna go ahead and stop the screen share. Yeah, and I hope that maybe I'll see some of y'all soon. Maybe I'll be working with some of y'all soon, and that would be awesome. So I hope everyone has a great rest. Oh, is there another question? Thank you for your great presentation. Thank you so much. I am, thank you guys for being great listeners and sticking around. Sorry if I was sick or a little sniffly or gross. I'm definitely just getting over this cold. Do I have a PhD? No, I have a master's in experimental psychology from Appalachian State University. I am working my way to a PhD, but it is slow moving for me. But I've definitely been helping people get theirs for about 2.5 years. So I definitely know the process. Okay. I think people are trickling out now. I'm not seeing any more questions, so I'm gonna go ahead and get off of here. Thank you all so much. I hope everyone has a great rest of your Tuesday. Is it Tuesday? It is Tuesday. I hope everyone has a great rest of your Tuesday. And like I said, hopefully I see y'all around. And maybe I'm helping with y'all later soon. So thank you.